Hey everybody, it's Friday here on the Outpost Unknown YouTube channel, and you all know what that means. We're about to talk Scully getting horny for some Amish aliens on eXhuming the X-Files. My name is Matthew. I'm joined once again by my great friend, Jeremy.
Hey, everybody.
Now, we are talking Gender Bender this week. This is the first episode of the X-Files to sort of delve into themes of sex and sexuality and all that entails in terms of network television. This is directed by Rob Bowman and written by Larry and Paul Barber. Rob Bowman, I believe he is the individual, this is his first time directing an episode, and he goes on to direct, I want to say, over 30 episodes, and he directed the first X-Files movie, Fight the Future. So from this episode here, he became a big fixture on X-Files going forward. Now, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jeremy. Why don't you take us through Gender Bender?
All right. So it starts at a laser tag place that is dressed up like a club, glowing shit on the walls. Some dude is walking around with like four extras that they just reposition constantly throughout the place to make it feel like it's a full dance club. He goes over and he's getting stalked by this girl who is not dressed like she belongs in a nightclub. She's got this like flowery dress on, kind of dark, but anyway, he goes over to this machine. He starts poking buttons at it. She touches him. He turns around. He's instantly seduced by this girl who I wrote down as a 5 out of 10.
Now, I don't want to be mean to this girl. I don't want to be mean to her, but I will say when she first popped up on screen, I wasn't getting sort of like the vibes of, oh wow, this woman is like an amazing beauty or something that could just get dudes instantly. Wasn't getting that vibe from her.
But I wasn't actually going to say that part out loud, except for later on in the episode, some other dude calls her a 3 out of 10.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well,
it's true.
She seduces him. They go back to his apartment, and right at the tail end of a marathon sex session, she gets out of bed and walks across the room and stares at him for a little bit. And he's like, "Why don't you come over here and cuddle or something? Like, where are you going? That was great." And then he
so
starts
amazing.
fucking. He just clutches his chest and starts dying. He has this huge coronary, some pink foam links out of his mouth. It looks like a, proto grimace shake death. And then we get the opening credits.
Well, yeah, I mean, the big thing here is she turns into a he.
Oh yeah,
we
right.
we sort of see, it's kind of like a weird morphing effect. She's kind of like in shadow, and then they sort of like pan down her body a little bit, and then it realizes it's like man legs. I think it stops on the feet, and it's like, okay, those are not the feet of a woman. And it sort of goes over and sort of wanders by, and we sort of see that she has turned into a he. So yeah, then we get to the opening credits. What did you think of this sort of opening? Was this something that sort of intrigued you when you watched it, or were you sort of like in this day and age? Because I think back then it was a much different time period, right? Society and culture and stuff. Did you feel anything problematic with any of this time, like, almost 30 years later?
Not well. There was a scene later on when I mean, they made light. Well, we'll talk about it when we get to it. But at least in the initial part of it, no, I wasn't. It wasn't weird. It's honestly, I remember loving this episode as a kid. I
Okay.
remembered specifically what happened at the tail end of this episode that stuck with me, even though I'd only seen it, once when it was played live.
Yeah.
I don't remember any of this beginning part, but I remember getting through it and being like, well, okay, that was a opening. Got to
Yeah.
keep in mind we're coming off of Beyond the Sea, so
Oh, I
what
know.
is going to stack up to that?
Very true. Very true. So where does it go from here?
So we end up with Mulder and Scully showing up for a natural causes death. The guy had a coronary with a little bit of foam leaking out of his mouth, and it's still not immediately clear, as it is oftentimes in these episodes, why they're even there in the first place.
Well, Scully doesn't know either. She's like, "Why are we here?" The guy's like, I don't know. I was just told to contact the FBI if something weird like this happens. I will point out that when Scully's having this little conversation with the police officer or detective or whoever he is, she says kind of like a funny line now in context. She says, I wrote it down, quote, it's hard to imagine in this day and age someone having sex with a perfect stranger, unquote. And I think, if someone were to watch this today, they'd be like, "What are you talking about? People have sex with strangers all the time. It's a typical thing." But in the context of when this episode was made, this was 93, 94ish. It probably produced it in 19 or filmed it in 1993. It aired in January of 1994. AIDS was a real big deal back then. This was just like a year or so before the Magic Johnson sort of played in that All Star game with HIV, and that was a huge deal
Yeah.
whether he should, how he shouldn't. Around this time period, there was a lot in the media. It's like, hey, don't have sex with strangers because HIV and AIDS is still a big thing. I
Yeah.
think Freddie
I mean,
Mercury died fairly
this is
soon back then and stuff.
yeah, this had aired just 2 years after Princess Di went on camera to shake that one HIV patient's hand
Yeah.
because we were so afraid of these people that we didn't want to be in the same room as them
Hmm.
due to the ignorance running around about gays and HIV in particular.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of where that comment or that quote that the writers wrote in there, like, it's hard to imagine someone in this day and age. I think it's because of the greater HIV/AIDS context that was going on at the time.
So, head guy that's like in charge of the investigation notes that this dude and this chick was on camera going into his apartment at 10:13 p.m. and then the only person that leaves a little bit after midnight is some dude wearing this other dude's clothes. So they were having sex for roughly 2 hours. No, I mean, I die from
The
that. I think
guy
I would.
said it was amazing, Jeremy. He said, he's like, this was the best I've ever had in my life. Come on over
Yeah,
and cuddle some more with me.
right. Eh, he could have. This isn't an X file, is what I'm trying to get
Yeah.
at. The guy just had some mind blowing sex. If I had sex for 2 hours, I would feel like dying too.
Yeah.
So
I think the cop even makes a crack about it. I love when they show Scully's reaction to this thing. She just kind of looks like, why would you say something like that? But it's just funny because it's like, oh yeah, man. I guess that's the way I'd want to go. If my coronary's gonna pop, that's the way it should go. Wasn't it
what's fun?
Matthew McConaughey's dad? I think the story is Matthew McConaughey's dad always said, "Hey," he always told all of his kids, like, "I'm gonna die having sex with your mom. That's how I'm gonna die," and that is how he died. And I saw some quote. I think he might have been on Howard Stern or something, and Howard Stern was asking about it. He was like, "Yeah, when he died, and like the paramedics were like, taking his body out. He said his mom ran out and pulled the sheet off and said, no, everybody needs to see this, like, because she was so proud of like how, you know, great Matthew McConaughey's dad's penis was." And then he died doing what he wanted to do, his wife.
It's a good woman right there.
That is.
So we get back to Mulder's office, and they're talking about why is this an X file? Then he had what is it, 4 or 5 different X files about how this was happening down the eastern coastline, starting somewhere in Massachusetts, and then like in Baltimore, and then well, eventually it ends up getting into DC. And Mulder is kind of like happy with this case that all of a sudden it was break because he's all like popping around the office like I can invest some sort of sex crime shit. Like he was really, really into it at that moment. I'm like, all right, maybe Mulder just really likes. Well, we talked about his love of porn,
Yeah.
and whenever he mentions sex, he always does it jokingly. But he seemed to be like, I'm really looking forward to this
This is
case.
an exciting case.
But he the one that ties this into the X file and the of the many, many things that keep coming up in the show that I just find impossible to fucking believe is that while he's rooting around in this corpse, he finds white clay marks that he is able to test. And this clay is traced back to some weirdo Amish cult community
Yeah, the
in New
kindred.
Hampshire.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think it's in Massachusetts. I think it's in Massachusetts. They call them the Kinder. They're not. They don't. I think they specifically say that they're not Amish, but they're just this weird Amish-like religious sect in Massachusetts.
gotcha. And I like these killings have been happening down the eastern seaboard, traveling hundreds of miles over the course of, I want to say, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. This dirty bitch left her community with a bunch of clay underneath her fingernails and just never washed her hands, apparently. And that's how we make an X file out of
That's true. I hadn't actually thought about that, but yeah, you're right. Dirty.
it.
Clean your fingernails, lady.
So because of this extremely loose reason to go investigate these not Amish people that look like Amish people, they show up in their hometown, like in city limits, not actually going out to visit them because they're gonna. I don't know. I don't know what possesses them to walk into a thrift store in the downtown area.
I think Mulder he makes that crack about not really like a southern joke, but he's like, "Hey, can you need some horse feed for you or something like that?" He's like, "I'm going to go in here and check out the locals or something like that." And he just goes in and yeah, and Scully sort of sits outside waiting for well, doesn't he actually does he talks to the guy inside, doesn't he? The
Well,
guy.
that it was two different stores. They are
Oh, yeah, yeah.
immediately they walk into a thrift shop. Some lady stands up and greets them. And it's weird. It's really off-putting in that scene because the lady starts talking to them. She doesn't immediately have the answer, so this other guy in the back of the room like stands up and starts like mansplaining these Amish people over the top of this woman, and they do this shit so much in this show, where they just invite a guy in to just shut a woman up for a minute about stuff. And
That's
then
true.
he's like, "Well, you got what are those photos behind you?" And oh yeah, these it's all photos of these Amish people from like the 30s. And
Yeah.
immediately Mulder's like, "Well, what's with the missing ones? Who the fuck cares?"
Yeah. Well, he's also the one that's like, Scully, I think I've seen this person before.
Yeah,
Like I've
I
looked
mean,
at I look at this grainy black and white photo and I've seen this person before.
and she had it was funny. I was sitting next to my wife watching this episode, and she grew up Mennonite. Her father is a professor of history, specifically in, or well, has focused on Mennonite and Amish stuff. So she grew up around a lot of this shit. And like Scully makes a crack that there's a lot of interbreeding. So you look at a picture from the 30s, chances are all of
Yeah.
their kids and their kids' kids look like each other. And she said, that's accurate. They actually study Amish people for congenital diseases due to inbreeding
Oh,
because
interesting.
there's such a concentration in these communities because they just breed amongst each other.
Hmm.
So we we do that. Then they make something about voodoo. Like they said that they're the people in the thrift store said that these Amish people were up to some weird voodoo shit,
Yeah.
and I that line was off-putting to me.
Yeah,
Like
it was strange. Yeah.
voodoo is definitely a southern thing. If these guys existed in South Georgia, Alabama, somewhere in the Caribbean, or even Louisiana, yeah, voodoo is down there. But if you find that there's some weird cult or section cult of Amish like people up in New England somewhere, you're just going to say that they're weird Christians. I don't think voodoo is going to come into the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, voodoo's strange. As I was watching this, I was actually thinking about where my mom lives right now, which is Dannebrog, Nebraska. And about a year or two or so ago, a bunch of Amish people in Iowa, like a whole community, whatever you would call them, bought tons of land in and around Dannebrog. They essentially own like the whole town, essentially,
Wild.
and they still have like the horse and buggy, and they go into town and everything like that, and they have to have people sort of like do things for them, take them into Grand Island, for example, if they have to go get something in Grand Island. And it was weird because in the scene when you see like the horse and buggy and them coming up, my mom was just telling me she's like that's all the time in Dannebrog. They're just coming into Dannebrog and they get off and they sell their wares and stuff, their furniture and things of that nature. And it's interesting that this still happens to this day.
Well, that leads us into the next scene as they see some Amish folk roll into town to the feed store next door to this shop, and Mulder's going to go immediately start talking to them. So he goes over, goes in the store, vanishes. They just leave one kind of dopey looking dude outside who's, honestly, the first time I saw him, the first thing that came to my mind, raw sex appeal, because that's what they're really going for. Because Scully walks over, starts petting his horse, trying to get him to talk to him, and the whole time she's just like thinking about this guy and what she wants to do.
I don't think so yet, because I think it's when he touches her hand and then he starts like rubbing like at the base of her thumb, because he does that multiple times. We'll talk about it later. And then she gets like insta wet, right? She's
Yeah,
like,
right.
oh gosh, she's like gushing out there on the sidewalk while Mulder's coming out, whatever. And it's like and to me, actually wrote this note down. I said the dude playing this guy looks like a weirdo creep. Like,
Right.
this is not the type of guy that you would think that Scully would have any sort of interest in. And I actually think it was cast that way intentionally, because you want to be able to show that this group of people, the kindred is what they're called, have these weird pheromonal sex powers, I guess, that where they can just I don't know if it's like hypnotizing kinda, or they can just make anybody, man, woman, whatever, I guess instantly do me. Do me now, do me hard. That's their superpower.
What a
And
great superpower.
Scully gets taken for it right there.
Yeah, she's just super interested in the power, raw sexual Amish peel of Graber standing next to the horse, just looking inbred as fuck. And I found out while during this scene, another little tidbit about it. You know that there are romance books based on Amish and Mennonite lifestyles.
No,
Like,
I had no
sex
idea.
books that these women read. They call them bodice rippers, but in that community, they're actually called bonnet rippers. Like,
Like the actual Amish women read them?
I don't know who's reading them, but I've
Okay.
seen a collection of these books that specifically like those cheesy, burly chested man on the cover
Oh yeah,
novels.
like
But it's
Fabio type stuff, right?
yeah, but it's specifically chicks in Amish communities that I don't get it. I'll read one someday and tell you
Yeah, I'm actually interested to check one of these out. I want to see what these things are like.
all right,
I-
so if I can see them from the bookcase where I'm at. I just gotta bring myself to yeesh. So eventually the people come back out of the feed store. Old Graber is like, I'm not supposed to be talking to you, even though you want to bone and I want to bone you, but we got to go. So they end up like finding out with this very very cheap map where these Amish people are at out in the woods. Like there's no clear road going out there, so they just drive to this wood line, park, and just walk into no
yeah.
trail, like harsh wood line, and they're just walking around until Mulder gets pissed off and balls up the map and throws it away. Which you should know, Scully makes this sweet catch because he
Yeah.
just kicks it with his foot, and she instantly just grabs it. Like, wow,
I wonder if that was
reaction time.
planned or if that was
No
just a
way.
happy accident.
No way. Her hand just reaches out and snatches that thing as it's about to go.
It was cool, yeah.
And then all of a sudden they're surrounded by wood Amish. Like they're walking, they're bitching at each other, they're mad, they're about to leave, and then suddenly there's like 8 Amish people just walking out of the wood line like,
Yeah.
"We want to pray with you, but you must give up your guns." And they're like, "No, we're not going to give you. Well, we're not going to take you anywhere. We mean no harm. Just
Yeah.
give us your guns." Now,
They try to set
bud.
this up that this group of kindred people could be a threat of some sort. I don't think they really pull it off. Like, I at no point in this episode did I ever feel any of these people were really threatening, other than even when the weirdo is like, we'll get there, trying to bang Scully. It still didn't feel like it was really a threat. Like he didn't feel threatening to me. But yeah,
I
I don't know.
think I think they tried to. Yeah, they didn't lean hard enough into it, but ultimately they weren't a threatening people. They just wanted to take care of their own, take care of their problems, and move on with their lives. Just
Yeah.
leave them alone to do what they wanted to do. But okay, you're a Fed, right? You get issued a firearm. You
Yes.
get ambushed by a bunch of fucking unarmed Amish people, and they
Mhm.
say, "Give up your gun." Do you- Isn't there like tons of rules and regulations that say you do not hand your
Yes.
firearm over to?
Yes. Yes, yes. This is one of the many things as I was watching all of these episodes for our recording tonight of multiple sort of violations that Mulder and Scully do repeatedly. There's one we'll talk about in a couple weeks where with the lone gunman when they are introduced, where Mulder literally asks them to commit a felony, hacking into like a government agency on his behalf. The rules are out the window. The rules are about as solid in the show as the badges they hold when they flash them, which is not well. Yeah, yeah. You cannot do that. You cannot hand your stuff unless you're actually being like threatened with your life or something. And it's like, hey, someone's got a gun on you. Drop your gun. Hand it over. That's one thing. But you cannot just willingly hand your firearm over to somebody, even if it's a
Right,
group of people, if they're not being threatening to you at all. You would just say, no, sorry, we'll walk away and we'll come back with a search warrant. That's
right.
the proper procedure.
But they cough up their guns anyway because they really want to visit these people.
Yep.
So they go, they get taken out to this farm, which was a really good location. If you look at the ground where they're at, there's a road that leads up to between their little house and their barn. The house itself is pretty well taken care of. The barn is okay taken care of. But what I noticed is that it was soaking wet out there, and there wasn't one tired vehicle track going on this road up to the house. It's just something
Hmm.
stupid that I noticed, but
Interesting.
they don't take vehicles out there. So they found a location that was somewhat well taken care of, pristine, and didn't had actually really only been serviced by people riding in wagons.
Interesting. That's good production design.
Then they walk through a weed field. There's a bunch of people just standing around, all these Amish people doing farming stuff, but they're just like half-ass stabbing the ground like lightly while they it's a trampled over wheat field. And I felt so bad for it because we come around to the end of the movie, the climactic shot, and it looks really, really decent, but the surrounding wheat field was also completely trampled over by the production crew. Like it's
Yeah.
just a mess out there.
Pour
So
one out for the dead, the fallen wheat.
let me see.
This where when they get to the when they get into the house, because there's a woman there. I don't remember what her name is, but she seems like the matriarch almost of this kindred Amish community, and she brings them in, and they have that really awkward, uncomfortable like dinner sequence at the table. This is where the dude starts like choking, and you sort of and Scully wants to save him or whatever, and they will not. They will not. I guess their sort of rule is like they have to take care of themselves, or we take care of our own. We can't. We don't let any outsiders who aren't part of our sort of thing do our thing. But I was reminded, I don't know why, but this whole sort of dinner sequence reminded me of like the X Files version of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre dinner at the end. Just a bunch of weird people doing and saying weird things while the outsider. If they would have allowed Scully and Mulder to just sit there screaming at the table, it would have been total Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's how I saw that whole sequence.
They were very, very weird people. I thought it was
Yep.
well acted by and large
Sure.
in that
Yeah.
scene. Eventually, you get some guy because they're questioning about these murders. Like, do you know anything? We have problems with people getting murdered. We have questions for you, but they're not getting anything answered. Then this dude stands up. And he's like, "No more questions. You'll shut up at the table," or something like that. And then the matriarch, he's like, "You need to take your anger because we're gonna punish you." They never really figure out what happens to him, but it sounds like he's gonna get a spanking after the FBI leaves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they end up getting escorted, or they don't get anything answered. They end up getting escorted back through the woods after dark with their little lantern, saying, "Your car is just over there. Don't come back." And so Mulder just shuts off his light and immediately goes back with Scully.
Immediately goes back, breaking more rules. The FBI, you can't do this, Mulder. Like, you can't do this. You can't just illegally trespass on someone else's property without a warrant just to sort of look through their windows. And as we come to find, go down into their catacombs to find out what's going on, even if he were able to successfully find a crime, it would be tossed in court immediately because he didn't follow any of the law to
No,
obtain the evidence.
nope. But I don't. I don't know that he knew he was going to find out anything about the murder or anything like that. He just his weirdo senses were tingling,
Yeah.
and he just wanted to know what the fuck they were doing. So they get back. They're hiding in the dark. They see all of the Amish people like dragging this tuberculosis patient out into the barn. There was this gorgeous barn door shot though, where they only had light, like flame light, inside of the barn as they're all kind of doing this weirdo silent
Yeah,
procession
yeah,
thing inside. And then they shut the doors. I'm like, that shot was really pretty.
yeah.
Somebody went through some trouble to shoot that. Then they peek on them. They find out you find out that there's this cellar door inside the barn, and they're taking the tuberculosis patient down there. Few of them leave, a few of them stay. Mulder decides he's going to see what's down in that cave, which leads to another really pretty shot where he has a lantern as he's going down into the cave. It's just very beautifully lit all the way down. It's fucking
Yeah.
sweet.
Those catacombs looked awesome. It was very reminiscent to me of, I mean, you've seen Aliens, when they sort of go into like the hive, when the space marines sort of go into it the first time. If
Sure.
if that was all lit up and not sort of dark and creepy, that's what these caves kind of reminded me of. It had just a very sort of, or I don't know if this were a legitimate catacomb or if this was a set that was built, but it had a very organic, strange feel to it. And I agree, the lighting of it was awesome. I thought it looked great.
Then he reaches like this inner chamber, which looks like a very ghetto ghetto, just very poorly set up medical facility where they're throwing all of this goop all over the tuberculosis guy, like covering him in jello and stuff like that. And I was reminded so much of the abduction scene from Fire in the Sky
Yeah, I was
that I
thinking that
didn't
too.
that I didn't know. Was this a nod to that?
Could have been. I didn't see anything that specifically mentioned when I was sort of reading details about the episode about Fire in the Sky. But Fire in the Sky came out in what, 91 or 92, I think.
Yeah.
So this would have been, that had to have been when they were at least writing the script, that had to be in their mind, subconsciously or not, because that was a very impactful alien abduction sort of thing, right?
Oh yeah.
Everybody remembers the end of Fire in the Sky. If you saw it, you remember the ending. It's just it's seared
That's
into you.
still the scariest abduction movie
Oh, it's
there's ever
terrifying.
been.
It's
God.
terrifying. I'm getting chills just thinking about it right now. That the guy's eye like wide open, and all that, those things like on his face. Oh my god. Eek.
And
Yeah, and the lard, it looks gross to me. Like, I don't, the the sort of jello lard stuff, rubbing that kind of stuff all over somebody's body, it ooks me out. I don't know. There's something about it I don't like.
then,
But Mulder comes to find out that the larded up dude is actually not dead at all.
yeah, like he hides from the cave people. He slides into this hole, finds the dude laying there, and then all of a sudden the guy opens his eyes while he's there. Like,
Yeah.
all right.
And that'd be creepy as fuck if you saw something like that. I'd be out of those catacombs quickly. But what is Scully doing while Mulder
Yeah.
is playing, hide and seek down there in the catacombs, looking at lard covered bodies? What's Scully up to?
While she's looking through the barn hole door, not really doing a great job of watching her own ass, Graber, with his raw sexual appeal, just shows up and says, "I have to show you something. Come here." So they go back into this tiny house. Like it's a 2-story house, but you could feel there's only like 4 small rooms on the first floor, 4 small rooms on the second floor. So where the fuck are all these Amish people that left the barn went? I don't know. But he goes into an empty house to an empty bedroom, and starts talking about his best friend, that he knows who the killer is, and that it's his best friend who had left, started giving her information, and then just throws all of it out the window because he just wants to bone. Like,
He rubs her the base of her thumb again. I mean, maybe that's just the sweet spot. I think there's a pressure point there. Maybe that's the whole secret. Just
well,
start
they said
rubbing the base.
it was pheromones, wasn't it? It was so many, like, humans normally
Yeah.
emit sexual pheromones, and if your partner potentially picks up on some of that, there's some hind lizard monkey brain thing that makes you aroused. So this is that times 1,000, where they're just emitting so much pheromone that you can't help but just want to throw off all your clothes and fuck until you have a heart attack, because that was also the pheromones had caused the heart attacks in the people in the first place. They're not being killed. There's just so much passion that they're dying from
Yeah, and I thought that was an interesting angle of this because it didn't seem like this guy was, and he wasn't an intentional serial killer running around, you know, killing people and taking their skins or whatever he's doing. It was just like, no, this person's just super horny, and he's just banging these people to death. And they don't even realize it.
it. But they find out what kind of who it is. Like, they leave, and
Well,
then
Mulder finds them. Remember, Mulder goes into the house, and the
oh
weirdo
yeah,
creeper,
yeah.
he's on top of Scully, and he's like, "Get off of her!" and, and he grabs, and Gillian Anderson, her body is like limp, like
Yeah.
he literally has to pick her up and put her arm around his, and she's like, "Oh." He takes her out, and they're going, and Mulder's pissed. He's like, "What the hell were you doing in there?" And then she like stops, and then she vomits. He's just like, she's like, I don't know. I'm so horny. I don't know why. And they end up in that car, and I love that car sequence. I actually wrote it down. Where Scully's like, I'm really embarrassed. Like she's like, I'm super embarrassed. And Mulder's like, I know what I saw, Scully, and I saw you about to do the wild thing with a
Yeah.
total stranger. It was so funny. Oh God, I that. It was hilarious. It was hilarious.
Yeah. And that guy really, nah. I don't think Scully is trying to jump into bed with him, but
No.
she was there for it. And you know what? I kind of appreciate that she didn't end up, being so wound up that she started aiming those attentions towards Mulder. I appreciate that she just threw up and kind of got sick. There was more of a date rape drug situation than
Yeah,
it was just
yeah.
biting him on the mind.
Yeah, because it wasn't like she was consenting to this
No.
by any means. So you could argue that all these kindred that are doing this to people, because even we get to the scene with Nicholas Leah, who eventually ends up playing Krychek. In that sequence, he tells the chick, he's like, "I'm not interested. Like, I don't want this." It's not till again rubbing the base of the thumb that he suddenly becomes insta horny. And I guess there's a thread you could think about here. Like, are all of these Amish people who are doing this essentially rapists? Because nobody seems to be like, hey, yeah, I'm down, let's go. It's no, no, no. Actually, let me turn your brain a different direction, and sort of force you into this weird thing. It's problematic. I think it's problematic if you think about it just on its face of what these kindred people are doing, or if it was just that one guy, or if it's multiple. I'm not exactly sure, but the guy who was trying to get on Scully, she certainly wasn't just like consenting, like, yeah, let's have a roll in the proverbial hay. He's kind of making her do it, which is kind of rapey.
It was. It was. This episode was icky enough
Yes.
quite a bit.
Yes.
So we cut back to the guy chick that's up and down the eastern seaboard. She tries to catch the attention of some dude on a cell phone. That dude was alpha as fuck. Like, no, bitch, just get the fuck away from
that
me. I'm on the phone.
that's the guy that ends up playing Krychek.
Guy chick.
He's
Yeah.
playing a different role here, but they cast him late next year or next season as Krychek.
All right. All right. They just liked him so much as
Yeah.
a rape victim. They had to bring him back.
Look, when he's in the hospital or whatever, and they're questioning him, he does a good job. Like he's a good actor, so I can see why they brought him back later on.
And that was the other kind of problematic thing, but it was just a product of his time, is that
Mhm.
entire interrogation scene.
Yes.
Um, he gets busted by a cop screwing around with his former Amish chick. He almost starts getting killed, but then she or the a policeman busts it up and gets killed for it, or really, really horribly maimed by a
Yeah.
chick with superhuman strength. Suddenly, she runs off as she turns into a guy, and he notices it, and he immediately doesn't want to say anything due to just rampant homophobia in our culture back
Hmm. Yeah, and he says something because he looks out the window in his car and he sees that she has turned into a he, and he's very embarrassed to even talk to Mulder and Scully about that. And he's like, "This is off the record, right?" And Mulder knows because at this point Mulder's already put together that there's some sort of weird. Because when he was down in the catacombs, he saw that person changing, like changing sexes from a man to a woman, and Mulder's already having that kind of line of questioning, and the guy was like, he's like, "Hey man, it used to be uncomplicated when you went to the club." This is also post Crying Game, which was another sort of cultural touchstone sort of movie. So I think there's a lot of that kind of stuff, bubbling under the surface of this episode, and you know, looking at it in from a lens of today, modern. 21st century. I think you can kind of look at this stuff and feel a little like, ugh, that probably didn't age well necessarily, those lines and how it was done. But I don't think there was necessarily ill intent on the part of the writers of it. It just seems like inarticulate language now, that we're 25 years removed.
then. Yeah, they weren't glamorizing this. They weren't trotting any of it out for exposure or cheap shots or
Right.
laughs or anything like that. It was just what it was at the time. Now I can't remember. I failed to take notes. How do they end up finding the killer?
That's a good question. I remember that because I was like, this is very Seven like. They show up at this apartment building. And gosh, I'm even struggling now to remember how they made that connection to get there. But they do end up at this apartment building, and they find him. I guess she has turned back into a he, and he's in his tidy whities.
Oh
running-
God, the the loosest tight, like he was. I swear that dude changed underwear in scenes like three different times, because if you watch the initial running out of the room, it looks like he's wearing just baggy woman's panties, right?
Yes, it's
But then
so
in a
weird.
scene downstairs, it looks like he's wearing a full fucking pillowcase
It's
as underwear.
it's weird. It's very, very weird. But eventually, a chase scene happens, and what I noted about this is, again, we have talked on previous episodes of how the writers are going out of their way to make Scully a very brave individual, someone who is willing to take charge. You made the excellent comment because I look for it every time now. She's always the one that pulls her gun first.
Oh yeah.
She's doing all this. There's a sequence. The guy basically knocks Mulder silly. Again, Mulder's kind of knocked out, laying down in this corridor, and it's Scully the one that chases this guy down, trying to catch him. And I just think it's really interesting. I'm struck by the frequency in which the show writers are doing this for this character. I think if you go back and look at this season, I think people, even like from now, if you've never seen the X Files before, and you're like, well, there were no strong female characters on television shows back then. You would think, you would make the assumption that Mulder is the one that is the smartest one, and he gets all the answers right, and he never defers to Scully, and Scully is the one that's always just kind of subordinate to him. No, I mean, even some of the episodes we're going to talk about coming up, Scully over and over, she's proven right. She does the strong, heroic, brave thing, and yeah, they do this again with Scully here, and then we get to the strange ending, the very unusual ending. How does Scully sort of wrap this up in a way, or what happens in the alley? I guess.
But she comes downstairs. She finds Mulder knocked out. They did the fucking thing again that I hate about this show, and it's just glaring. they ADR'd
Oh
Mulder saying something to her as she's running by.
yeah.
Like, like he's out fucking cold. And he doesn't move, his mouth doesn't move, but they feel the need to tell the audience what is going on or give them reason to go somewhere. They did it in Eve a couple of times.
Did you
But it's
notice in EBE there's a sequence when Mulder like runs through a door and he actually mouths something, but there's no audio.
oh, I didn't see that.
There's no audio at all. That was I was like, wow, they completely missed the ADR on that one.
But he goes like, Scully downstairs is what he says as she's running by his unconscious body. She goes outside and they see you see these, and it was kind of a cool scene. How they brought the people, the other Amish people just show up in the city's alley by there's nobody there. You see these bright lights on a brick wall, and then all of a sudden there's shadows of people, like a group of people there, and they completely surround this sexual predator slash serial killer, and they're like restraining that person. They're coming to take the dude away because they take care of her own. Sexy Graber like turns around from the group and stands between them and Scully, who's drawn down on the entire group of them, and he's giving her that sexy blue steel look again. It's the same fucking look he had in the opening scene.
Take my pheromones, take them.
Well, she was each time she starts falling for it. Like,
Oh
oh
yeah.
man, I want you to do inbreeding things with me. Like, I don't know
I
why they
want
thought
your
that was.
Amish babies.
Yeah, there's some chemistry there that I just don't buy, but it's there.
It's
And then
non-consent chemistry is what it is.
sure, GHB consent, baby. So they're there, and then they go back to that cool scene where you see the struggling shadows on the brick wall, and then they all vanish. So it's just Scully standing in that alley all by herself.
Yep.
So they get together with the local police force, sheriffs. They drive as quickly as they can out to this Amish place, and nobody's there. Nobody's around. They go down to the basement where the cave system. And this is what I always thought was just such a cool ending when I was a kid. Was they open the door and the cave is completely filled up with dried white clay that
Yeah.
these Amish people are known for making pottery or whatever out of, and what led them there in the first place. And then he walks from there, and they're like, "Well, where do they go? They don't. Everything is still here." Like Mulder says something about it being them being or taking off and leaving, and he walks out into the middle of their wheat field, and there's just this great camera shot or the helicopter shot of them standing in the center of a huge crop circle.
Yep. And that's how it ends. So you loved this ending as a kid. Revisiting, what was your feeling of the ending?
I liked everything about this episode that didn't have to do with the sex part of it. Like the cave, the fire in the sky shit, the weird skin bag light that he pushed his hand into. The mystery of them and them ultimately taking off. Like I'm a dope for things like that. I really didn't care at all about the killer storyline.
Yeah.
There didn't seem to be any much in the way of stakes, but you know.
Yeah. And this episode, I'm right on board with you. I think it's good, but I wouldn't put it sort of like high up on a tier list if I was ranking X Files episodes. I think this was one of those things that had an interesting kind of idea, but maybe I just in general wasn't really interested with the idea, and so it was harder for me to sort of get into this. A few facts about it: an early draft of the script contained a scene where a man's crotch rots away, and this was cut due to concerns over it being shown on network television. So Fox censors said, "We can't do that," which was interesting. The actress Kate Twa was the first to be cast, so she was the female version of the serial killer. They cast her first, and then they cast the guy based on her looks because they wanted to try to make both of them look the same or as close to the same as it could. And then the episode faced criticism from the crew over its ending, and this is kind of why I wanted to see what you thought about this ending, because it said there was a Deus Ex Machina to sort of end this episode, and indicating that the kindred may have been aliens. And producer James Wong felt that the episode's ending seemed overly abrupt and unexpected, describing it as appearing, quote, like we tried to play a trick on the audience to make them say, ooh, what the heck was that, unquote. He added that the lack of a real connection to the episode's plot meant that the revelation lost any sense of catharsis for the viewer. And Morgan said that the episode, quote, went too far. At what point do we become unbelievable, unquote? And when asked about the similarity between the kindred and the Amish, series creator Chris Carter noted that, quote, the Amish don't watch TV, so I wasn't worried about it, unquote. So, and I can see what they're saying, because I remember, I don't really remember this episode when I was a kid sort of seeing it, but I had watched it over the years as I sort of revisited X-Files and whatnot throughout my lifetime. And I do remember not quite liking this ending, because it just seemed like out of the blue. Like, well, what do you mean this is an alien thing? Like, this whole episode had nothing to do with aliens. It was this strange, I guess, like reincarnation changing sort of sexes thing. And then suddenly, like, they took off in a UFO. So I'm not a huge fan of how it ends. I like the feel of the ending. I think it's right on. Like, I love when they go and the clay is all, boarded up everything, and they can't get into the catacombs any longer. But I don't necessarily like the UFO angle, just because I didn't get that from anything in the episode. Was there anything in throughout the episode that you're like pointing to, like, oh yeah, this could relate to aliens?
Well, yeah, the cave underneath was very, or again, that was very kind of. It was a combination of two things, and I haven't mentioned the other thing because I don't know if you've ever seen this movie. Have you ever seen Buckaroo Banzai
Of
and his
course.
adventures across
Of
the
course, yes.
the Lectroid nest is what the dirtier parts of the inside of that cave looked like.
Okay, I
And
can
the way
see
that they
that.
shuffle, like I grew up watching that movie a lot, and
Yeah.
that's when he touched the skin bag light. Like I think they did that in that Buckaroo Banzai movie almost the exact same way. And
Okay.
it's when they went down into that area that I'm like, are these fucking aliens? And again, I thought a lot of this episode was somewhat forgettable, but that ending has stuck with me for years. Because again, I've only ever seen that episode, well, now twice, but just that original time that it aired,
Yeah.
and it just stuck out in my mind because of this entire season so far. I think this episode, the ending of it is the best ending of any of the episodes that I've seen.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Interesting. We're just gonna, I guess, diverge on that. I think that this ending, while I like the idea of it, for me personally, it didn't really connect with anything in the rest of the episode, and it didn't feel like there was a good sense of sort of closure. I mean, I was also being like, how the hell did these kindred show up in this alleyway, and why didn't they get this guy weeks before? If they knew he was going out there murdering people, why did they suddenly decide to pop up and take him now? There's a lot of stuff in this episode where I'm like, I don't feel like they really wrote this as well as it could. I needed a little bit more explanation, and I think the Deus Ex Machina of it all, where it's like, okay, well, suddenly the group's in the alley, and suddenly they're going to take them, and suddenly they flew off, and they're aliens now. In the last 2 minutes was just kind of like a what? I didn't understand it, but otherwise, I think the episode's fine. I like the episode. The ending is a little wonky for me personally, but that is Gender Bender, ladies and gentlemen. And next week we are going to talk about episode 15, Lazarus, where I guess we're going to be resuscitated. We're gonna swap some bodies, and it's going to be a fun time. So stay tuned next Friday on the Outpost Unknown YouTube channel.